Well, let's turn now to Jesse Rodenbiker for more on China's conservation efforts. He's an associate research scholar at Princeton University's Center on Contemporary China. Thanks so much for joining us, sir.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
And you're also the author of the book Ecological States, Politics of Science and Nature in Urbanizing China. I'd like to begin with, can you please help explain how China's leadership role in COP15 can help affect meaningful climate dialogue and change? And how does that align with the roadmap for biodiversity laid out by China's Ministry of Ecology and Environment?
Sure. So from 2020 to 2022, China served as the president of the 15th United Nations Convention on Biodiversity. This is colloquially called the COP15. Now, hosting COP15 was really a defining moment for China's environmental turn and something of a coming out party for China as a global environmental leader. So for decades, China was really seen as something of the world's largest polluter, and not really as a champion on the environment, but COP15 really contributed to changing this perception. Chinese delegates at this convention, under the leadership of Wang Runqiu, the president of China's Ministry of Ecology and Environment, facilitated the negotiation of a major agreement called the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which set the global biodiversity targets and really the agenda for global biodiversity for the current decade that we're in. So this is a key example of how China is performing environmental leadership by helping define the global biodiversity targets.
And then looking within China, it's obviously a huge country with diverse regions. What sort of state-to-state cooperation are we seeing on the environmental front there?
There is really well-organized state-to-state cooperation, largely around projects like the Ecological Redlining Project, which is perhaps China's most prominent homegrown environmental model. So China began initially rolling out the environmental ecological red line project in 2011 as part of national plans to zone 20% of land for biodiversity conservation. And there have been concerted efforts across provinces from the mid 2010s until the present to zone 20% of land for ecological protection. Now, alongside these conservation zoning projects, however, there are widespread forms of conservation-induced resettlement and conservation-induced displacements, which are some of the things that I engage with and analyze in my book. Now, in the early 2020s, China actually increased this number from 20%, which was the original target, to 30% of national land for biodiversity conservation. So this number corresponds with the new biodiversity framework that China helped to orchestrate in the COP15 conference. And this new zone of 30% essentially signals to the world that China is already implementing the global policies that it helped to define during COP15. And in this way, China is performing environmental leadership for the world and suggesting that ecological red lines could even serve as an example for environmental models elsewhere.
And a feather in the cap has really been China's Panda Exchange program. It's been so successful, and it's one that the U.S. treasures. It's the world's longest running conservation program for a single species. How valuable are these types of exchanges in perception and in advancing discourse towards ecological advancement globally?
I think they're incredibly important. There's a lot of work that has come out about panda diplomacy and the ways that panda exchanges and environmental exchanges can really serve the function of bilateral exchange and multilateral discourse. In other types of exchanges outside of panda diplomacy per se, there are also myriad exchanges around environmental policy, trainings, environmental cooperation, etc. Another good example of this is an exchange between the Chinese Ministry of Natural Resources and the Thai Ministry of Natural Resources. And they've been having environmental exchanges around marine conservation and marine spatial planning. And one of the outcomes of that is a joint laboratory, the China-Thailand Joint Laboratory on Climate and Marine Ecosystems. And in these exchanges, China is really responding to global issues in biodiversity conservation, particularly in global South contexts.
All right, we're running out of time, so we will have to leave it there, but thank you for your perspective, Dr. Jesse Rodenbiker.
Thanks for having me.